I started investigating an article that just came out yesterday about the outrageous spending of an SBC seminary president, and it turned into a rabbit hole of corruption that was deeper than I could have imagined. Sit back and I will tell you the story of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary President Adam Greenway's downward spiral into corruption and how he spent around $1.5 million in student money on personal purchases. Welcome back to Spare No Arrows. My name is Cody Lawrence, where we are taking aim at bad theology and exposing darkness. So Adam Greenway was the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary from 2019 to 2022. It is an embarrassingly short term as far as seminary presidents go, and he resigned for an embarrassing reason as well. He was later replaced by the current Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary president, David Dockery. Now, I talked about Adam Greenway once before. Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary was going to screen a documentary called Enemies Within the Church, which was about exposing wokeness in evangelicalism in America. And it featured some images of Greenway's school, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And in response, Greenway was not impressed and did all he could to pressure Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary to not air the video, to censor it, to silence the exposing of wokeness in seminaries. And Adam Greenway sent a letter, and he also copied this on a tweet, where he said in the tweet, "It is with deep disappointment but strong conviction that I have sent the following letter to Dr. Michael Spradlin, prayerfully requesting him to reconsider the decision of MABTS to host the premiere of a film whose trailer contains scandalous and scurrilous slander against SWBTS, his school." So that's where we talked about Adam Greenway before. Now, I was unable to find much more info about exactly why he resigned than this, but Adam said in his resignation statement, quote, "What we failed to appreciate was the enormity of the reputational, legal, and financial realities." He also added, "Only to be compounded by a global pandemic unlike anything we have ever experienced before." So maybe when he became president and was president for these short few years, maybe he got in way over his head. Maybe he was pushed out because he didn't do anything about the plummeting attendance at Southwestern. Or perhaps he mishandled something else tremendously while he was there. We may never know the truth about that, but what we do know the truth about is how Adam W. Greenway spent some of his seminary funds while he was there, which I will get into more later. So right after his announcement to resign from the seminary in September of 2022, he announced that he'd be taking an unnamed position with the International Mission Board, otherwise known as the IMB, which is also notorious for mishandling funds of their own, which come from the SBC churches. Now, evidently, right after he resigned from his seminary, the IMB didn't actually want him because they never created a position for him. The trustees evidently pushed back on his wanting to come to the IMB. And so whatever deal happened, it actually fell through. He never ended up going to the IMB, even though he said he was going to. Also, his Facebook account hasn't been updated since around his resignation in 2022. His website is outdated, and it has an error code at the top of the page, which means it hasn't been updated for a while. And I can't exactly tell where this guy works now, though he does update his Twitter page, where his most recent pinned tweet is this: "Last year at SBC 2022, I moved what the SBC Credentials Committee deemed a friendly amendment to forestall any action against Saddleback Church, Rick Warren's church, until the convention could more precisely determine/define how closely identified with the Baptist faith and message a cooperating church's faith practice must be. He goes on to say other things. But what this is, I spoke about this in a previous podcast episode, Rick Warren's church ordains female ministers. Now, regardless of if you think that's okay or not, the Baptist faith and message says that churches cannot ordain female ministers. To be in the SBC, your church cannot ordain female ministers. You cannot have female pastors in your church. Rick Warren's church did anyway, where currently they have multiple female pastors, and that is something that's going on in the SBC right this minute. And there will be more information on this coming out once we hit this year's SBC conference. But Adam Greenway pushes against that and against the Baptist faith and message and against biblical principles to forestall the removing of Saddleback Church for obviously and blatantly going against the rules of the Southern Baptist Convention, the organization of churches that these people are a part of and agreed to follow. So a real bastion of conservative values, this Adam Greenway guy who supports the decisions of left-leaning churches. Now, remember in his resignation letter when I said that he, quote, failed to appreciate the enormity of the financial realities? Well, let's dig into that a little bit. This is what released just yesterday from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm going to read this article and maybe skim through a couple of parts, but I think it is so interesting and revelatory of a lot of the corruption that is going on, not only in Southwestern, but potentially throughout the SBC. So let's get into it. The title of the article is this: Board Officers Issue Summary of Findings by Trustee Task Force, June 7th, 2023 is the release date of the article. And then they have a quote of the Southwestern Seminary Bylaw 5.4. And it says this: the president shall have direct charge of, full supervision over, and shall be responsible for all funds and properties of the seminary. So it sounds like the seminary president has ultimate power over all of the funds, so he can spend it however he wants to. Is that a good rule to have? Is that good to put that much power in the hands of a single man? Well, let's find out what he did with that power. I'll read the article. During the special meeting of the Southwestern Seminary Board of Trustees on May 30th, trustees overwhelmingly voted to request the officers to publish a summary of the findings of the work of the task force impaneled to review expenditures related to the president's home, the president's office, and any personal expenditures by the formal president, who is Adam Greenway. The board requested officers to publish, quote, publish audited financials as one comprehensive report for the fiscal years 2002 to 2022, and examples of presidential expenses as generated by the task force review. Okay, so they wanted to publish some kind of document so that they could review expenses from, the past decade, but specifically wanted to review the expenses from the previous president, Adam Greenway, who was in office just 2019 to 2022. Continuing on, it says the task force unanimously authorized during the fall 2022 meeting was composed of a bunch of people. I'm not going to read their names. You can view the article to get all the full details. The findings of this review, based on extensive research by the task force, along with recommendations for preventing such issues in the future, were presented to trustees at their spring 2023 meeting. So that just happened. Matters covered by the task force included suggested strengthened financial guardrails, evaluation of possible sale of portions of the campus, and spending habits of the former president. So this is a big deal. All of these things, they sound like very big deals, but specifically, they wanted to look into the spending habits of the former president. That doesn't sound good at all. So let's see what he did. The task force concluded that Adam Greenway, the guy who doesn't want Saddleback, or at least wants to forestall Saddleback being removed from the SBC for blatantly breaking SBC rules, the guy who didn't want wokeness to be exposed in the SBC in a different seminary that he's not even responsible for because his school was shown, and so therefore he probably denies that there's any wokeness in the seminary at all, which I'm very familiar with other SBC seminaries denying that there is any wokeness in them at all, even though there is. This guy engaged in a pattern of spending that the task force believes did not reflect proper stewardship of seminary resources, even though he's given this ultimate power to spend all the money that he wants. Interesting. So he must have really messed up. This pattern of spending occurred without deference to financial controls and seminary financial policies. Here we go. Here are the numbers. Between 2019 and 2022, over $1.5 million was spent on renovations, furnishings, and related expenses to the president's home. These expenditures were made at a time when the seminary was making significant budget cuts. Now, think about this. This is like right smack dab at the beginning of the pandemic. This is right when he comes in. The seminary is already dropping in attendance. They're making budget cuts. The student attendance is plummeting, and he's supposed to come in to fix it. And this is what he does. He spends $1.5 million on renovations to his home. Examples of the expenses for the president's home include, I'm going to round the numbers here, but about $60,000 for Christmas decorations. $60,000 for Christmas decorations. Do you think he could have gotten by spending, I don't know, a couple $100? Could he have spent his own money on Christmas decorations for his own home? Could he have cut back just a little bit? I don't know. When I was a youth pastor, I had a big budget to work with, and I hated getting anywhere close to the budget that I was given. Spending, they wanted me to spend it on stupid stuff like pizza and games, and man, I hated doing that. And that's me. This guy is in a much greater position, and he has a lot more money, and it seems like he's totally fine spending $60,000 on something as frivolous as Christmas decorations. Continuing on, more than $25,000 for artwork. $25,000 for artwork. He couldn't just go to Kinko's and get some pictures printed. $25,000 on artwork is a lot of money. And over $11,000 for an espresso machine and accessories. Now, I know a little bit about espresso machines. I've worked at a coffee shop in the past. An espresso machine that costs $11,000 is like big coffee shop level espresso machine with multiple spouts. The kind of thing you would need in a big coffee shop, not the kind of thing you would need in a home to make espresso for one or two people, right? The little tiny espresso machines that most people buy for their homes, still pretty expensive. You can get one for a couple $100 on the low end. High end, maybe $1,000. He spent $11,000. The cost of a car on an espresso machine for his house with money that the students paid the seminary for to go learn about theology. This is how he's spending the money. Despite extensive renovations completed early in his tenure, further optional work was done on the president's home, in other words, unnecessary work, in late 2021 when more than $180,000 was spent on HVAC work. The task force found that a significant amount of the work done on the president's home was carried out by the seminary's facilities team. creating an unsustainable demand and contributing to poor morale and high turnover. It was reported that employees were often asked to do the same job multiple times to meet Greenway's demanding expectations. Multiple change orders were also true with outside contractors, increasing the costs of the projects. Now, this sounds very familiar because students at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which I actually live right beside, actually does work on the president's property. The president of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary is Jason K. Allen. This sounds eerily familiar to my experience with Midwestern. I'll tell you more about that later because it ties in. But this is not just happening at Southwestern Seminary. This is actually happening at multiple seminaries. They just haven't released how much is being misspent at places like Midwestern. Continuing on. Between the summer of 2020 and early 2021, over $500,000 was spent on the president's office, including renovations and furniture. The task force also found numerous examples of improper expenses charged to the seminary by Greenway himself and or individuals whom he authorized to use his seminary credit card in violation of the seminary policy. So can't have other people using your credit card. He did it anyway. Told people to use his card. You know, he also tells people to mow his lawn, cut his grass, trim his bushes. Who knows? Work on his house. Now imagine if he didn't have faculty members doing the work on his house, it would have been even more expensive, right? But he decided to mistreat the staff at his seminary and make them quit their jobs at a Christian seminary because he was overworking them. Good president, good place. This is wild, this next part. So he gave people his credit card and they made purchases, including almost $10,000 for first-class airfare for Greenway, his family, and a family friend to Anaheim, California for the 2022 Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting. Now, they didn't have to fly first class. I think how much I pay for plane tickets, like, I don't know, can you afford a $10,000 airfare for your family? I can't. But he decides to use student money, student and other people funding the seminary, their money, to buy him and his whole family and a friend first-class airfare. Maybe he could have cut back a little bit. Almost $5,000 for the framing of personal diplomas. He must have had a lot of diplomas, or he must have gotten really, really expensive frames. I also happened to used to work for a frame shop, and frames aren't that expensive unless, you know, you go really outrageous. Almost $1,000 for a metal University of Florida gator head decoration, one of Greenway's favorite college athletic programs. So he spent seminary money on a metal gator head, almost $1,000. Nice. Published with these findings is a compilation of all the audited financials of the seminary from 2002 to 2022, introduced with an overview with pertinent details. It's also published in the 2023 SBC Annual, where all other financials were previously published each year. The compilation and overview demonstrate that the financial challenges at Southwestern are long-standing. Unfortunately, the trustees' hopes of correction in this financial trajectory in the 2019 election of Greenway were not realized. So they specifically elected him to not do this, and he did it anyway. And then he resigned. Now, in my experience, when people resign, sometimes they're forced to resign just so they're not embarrassed with firing. Now, we don't know that that's what happened to Greenway, but it seems increasingly likely that maybe he was forced to resign out of the excessive and egregious mishandling of so much seminary money. Let's go on. We grieve the pattern of poor stewardship evident in this summary of the task force's findings. We wish to express our gratitude to those seminary employees who sought to enforce existing policies and challenge the pattern of spending noted above. even as their efforts were met with resistance. I love that they added that line. That's great. We wish to underscore Chairman Roberts' May 30th statement. I can state confidently that the board leadership has exercised aggressively in its fiduciary duties, with trustees giving collectively thousands of hours of their time in doing so. Financial guardrails have been and continue to be researched and put in place. One example is that the chairman is now examining the expense reports of the president and the seminary leadership team on a quarterly basis. It's good, I guess. The Board of Trustees and the administrative leadership at the seminary are committed to every appropriate measure that will ensure proper stewardship of seminary resources in a manner that is consistent with the mission of Southwestern Seminary. Okay, you can read the full article. I just didn't read the last paragraph there, or the last couple paragraphs. And I left out some names. So if you want to look this up, you can. It's on Southwestern's website, and you can just Google it. So in a normal people world, not in the evangelical elite Big Eva world, but in normal people world where most of us live, we call this stealing. And stealing, I don't know, this is like not only just unchristian, it's not only against the policies at the seminary, but it feels to me like it's a crime. Taking other people's money and using it for something that you actually have no right to use it for at all. How can this happen? How is it ever allowed to happen? How did this happen for 3 years while this guy was president? How is this guy even allowed to be president in the first place? Why exactly didn't they do anything about this while he was president? Now, when I first saw this article, I had no idea the rabbit hole that I was about to go down. It's like when you look at anything related to the SBC, the more you dig, the deeper and more pervasive the corruption. It's like it gets worse and worse and worse the more you look. This also makes me ask the question, if this is going on at one of the biggest seminaries in the biggest Protestant denomination in the entire world, what other corruption, mishandling of expenses is happening at other seminaries? What kind of corruption or mishandling of expenses is happening at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, at Southern, at Southeastern, at Mid-America? Who knows? In fact, like I said earlier, I live right next to Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Jason K. Allen has been using seminary money to renovate his home just like Greenway. And if you look at his home, it's on the main road and everybody can see it. It was already huge. People lovingly refer to it as the president's mansion. That's what they called it before. It is at least, it seems to me at least, doubling in size. How much does that cost? And according to one student from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary that I spoke to, they're just doing this because they want to honor the president and his, I don't know how many kids he has, a couple, his wife and him, with a, 50-room house. I don't know how big it is, but it's massive. So this is what's happening in my own backyard. Ask yourselves the question, are these the organizations that we want to be supporting? A denomination that doesn't only contain this instance of corruption, but deep infection all across the top levels of all of its major organizations. I have other podcasts where I go deeper into a lot of that other corruption that is going on. And if you want more information on that, you can listen to those. You can look it up. It's easy to find. The intense amount of corruption in the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the world. This is Christianity in our nation. It's not good. Not good. Are these trustworthy people to be raising up the next generation of faithful pastors? After hearing this, nobody should be going to the seminary. outrageous that this even has a potential to happen. Your money, if you go to this seminary or any Southern Baptist Convention seminary, your money, your hard-earned money that you're actually working a job for, is going to people like Adam Greenway, who spends $1,000 on an alligator head sculpture. Are these trustworthy people to be raising up the next generation of faithful pastors, or are they just creating more people like them? Are they actually making Christianity in America better, or are they making Christianity in America and in the world worse? Is God using them to spread the gospel and teach pastors to be able to proclaim that gospel better? Or is God using these seminaries to judge us by creating more and more bad pastors, people like them, leaders who drive the direction of Christianity in our nation, who are deeply flawed, unfaithful, selfishly focused on money, clamoring for any position of power, and will do anything to hide their corruption? Catch you next time. God bless.